These last few years have been difficult. You can think about all that we've gone through as a country, whether it's the political strife or other issues, but let's just focus narrowly on COVID and how challenging and how difficult that has made our lives. This slide is indicative of what we would need to survive on a daily basis. We had masks that separated us from others because we had to be concerned about things. We went through gallons and gallons of hand sanitizer trying to keep ourselves clean. We began to operate in a world through the lens of a laptop. It was difficult times that called for a resilient response. For students, it was even more difficult in many ways. The way that you did school changed. Quickly shifting from in the classroom, potentially working with your other students and being there with your faculty, to being online and separated. And if that wasn't difficult enough, you also had to make friends and develop relationships online. Imagine going through a new student orientation via Zoom. Imagine doing dorm meetings via Zoom. Yeah, many of you don't have to imagine it because you lived it. And how difficult is it to build relationships and to make friends through a computer screen? It's tough. It was difficult. It required a resilient response. But for students, this last few years wasn't really the beginning of it. Studies have shown that students have been developing greater stresses and greater pressures on what's going on in their average life for years. So much so that a 2015 Psychology Today blog was entitled, "Declining Student Resilience, a Serious Problem for Colleges." So my talk today is not going to be about some things that I do to increase my resilience or a story about me and my resilience, nor is it going to be a talk about how you can increase your resilience. I want to spend a few minutes talking about how we all have an obligation to help increase the resilience of everyone around us. That's part of our calling in life, isn't it? To make the environments where we have influence better because we were a part of them. And I'm going to specifically talk to faculty about what we can do as faculty to try and increase the resilience of our students, because that's part of our calling as well. So we want to start for a second and have an idea of exactly what we're talking about when we say resilience. And so this is the definition I'm going to use. Resilience is the positive capacity to rebound or bounce back from adversity, uncertainty, conflict, failure, right? So many of us are okay with that and we get that, but also positive changes, progress, or increased responsibility. Academic resilience is defined very similarly, but it looks in the context of stresses and pressures in the work or in the classroom. So imagine that you are now been elected as an officer in your fraternity or sorority. That stress, that pressure is a good thing, but it requires a resilient response. Or maybe you are in one of the musicals, right? And you've got a part, and that requires a resilient response because that's adversity. Or maybe you are a leader in a school group that is putting on a huge event, and you have to get speakers, and you have to market it, something like this event. And that is a moment of adversity and requires a resilient response as well. So resilience, when they began looking at resilience, it started because some researchers looked at children who had difficult childhoods. And they found out of some of those children that they were extremely successful. And no matter how difficult their circumstances were, no matter how much adversity they faced, they succeeded in life in spite of that adversity. And they said, these children are special. And they have this component which is almost magical, and we'll call it resilience. And they looked at it as only if certain people had this ability, that it was something special, and they even used the words magical about the ability to be resilient in face of adversity. And fortunately, though, they did more research and they started to recognize, wait a minute, everyone is resilient. And one of the next articles that was written was actually entitled Ordinary Magic. Because we kept the context of being resilient as magic, but we put the context of it being ordinary because it wasn't something that was just special and reserved to a few people. So, we all have the capacity to be resilient. And then we start talking about, okay, so what does that mean? How do we access it? What is it like? And I like the way that's talked about resilience as it being an asset, right? So the business professor in me likes the asset aspect of it, right? So imagine a bank account. And you got a bank account, and you fill it up, and when you face needs, you draw on the funds in your bank account, and you watch it go down, right? Well, and some of your bank accounts may not be full very often, and it's going down. So let's talk about something else, right? Imagine your car, and you got gas in your car. And so you fill it up, and it's on the F, and it's full. And then you use it over time, and it gets down to empty, the E. And right before it gets to the E, you get what? A light that warns you almost at E. That's resilience, right? Now, fortunately, though, we can actually start to fill up our resilience tanks, whether it's in the bank account context or whether it's in the gas context. We can start to develop resilience to get ourselves back to where it's full, so that when we do face adversity again, we can fight it. I like it being talked about in the context of medicine. So imagine that there is some type of infection that's out there. Shocker, I think we can imagine that, right? So there's an infection that's out there, and you've got to be ready for it. So there are ways to prepare your body for that infection. You can get exposed to it and be around it. You can actually become infected and fight with it and develop a way to get over it. But the best way to fight that infection is to be vaccinated beforehand, so your body is taught that when you get this infection, when you're faced with it, we're prepared in advance and ready to deal with the challenge that's coming and ready to better fight that infection. Same thing is true with resilience. You will face adversity in your life. How are you preparing for it? Are you prepared in advance? Are you filling up your bank account? Are you filling up your fuel tank so that when that adversity strikes, you can actually deal with it resiliently, bounce back, rebound, advance? And adversity, again, it's not only bad, it can be the good things. New job, new position, new leadership role, giving a talk in front of an audience that's being recorded to go on YouTube. Right? All this stuff is good, but it's adversity that requires resilience too. So, how do you go about developing resilience then? There have been lots of researchers that have done a lot of research on the development of resilience, and they've looked at it in a lot of different contexts. How do you develop resilience in families? How do you develop resilience in academia and academics? How do you develop resilience in the workplace, individually? So you can look at all these different contexts and all the different ways that they've looked and said, these are ways to develop resilience, again, to better prepare you to face your adversity in the future. But you'll see three major themes that come out of it across all the contexts. One of them is focusing on protecting emotional health, right? So digging into the emotions and getting the emotional support when you need it at the moment of adversity, and develop emotional health beforehand. One of them is building connectedness and relationships, developing relationships and deep relationships. So having people that are around you that you know and that can support you in that capacity. And the final one is having leader and peer support, right? leader and peer support. So emotional health, developing and building relationships, leader and peer support. When you take those three things and you look at the behaviors and the characteristics of a servant leader and the way a servant leader acts in leadership, you'll see so many crossover, so much crossover and so many commonalities in that. So researchers have said there are 10 different behaviors that are exhibited by servant leaders, or there are 7 different characteristics that a servant leader would exhibit, or 5 different ways that you can see a servant leader operating in their context, right? So different researchers have different ways that they've described that. But if you go back to the gentleman who really put servant leadership as a construct out there, Robert Greenleaf, he said this: "You must seek to serve first." That's a servant leader. And when you evaluate all the different contexts that they look at it and the characteristics and behaviors, you see some commonality there as well. You see, servant leaders show empathy. Servant leaders build community. Servant leaders put the priority of others first. Servant leaders seek to develop relationships. So if you start to think, okay, what did we just talk about? Ways to develop resilience and the important capacities there, and you look at the things that servant leadership does and what servant leaders do there, you can see that being a servant leader in the context wherever you are can help develop the resilience of those around you. We oftentimes talk about leadership in the context of the idea of having a title. I'm the director of this. I'm the coordinator of this. I'm the manager of this. I spent 21 years in the corporate world before moving into academics, and I will tell you that more acts of leadership were done on the front line than were ever done by anyone with a title of leadership. So my challenge to each of you is recognize that you are a leader in every environment that you're in. And you have opportunities to exhibit leadership characteristics and behaviors in every environment that you're in. And by exhibiting those leadership characteristics and behaviors, you can influence others for the good. And particularly by helping them develop their resilience so that when they are faced with adversity, you build them up and you've prepared them in advance. Us in faculty have the capacity to influence our students, to build the resilience of our students as well, to prepare them for the adversities that they're going to face, whether they be negative adversities or positive adversities. We have to get to know them. We have to build relationships. I have a faculty colleague who taught me one of the first things that they do in every one of their classes is spend the first minute or two just asking, "How you doing? What's going on? How are the stresses? Midterms coming up? How do you feel about that? We got a lot of papers going on. What about this class? How are things going here?" Right? Just spending those first few minutes checking in, getting a feel for what's going on in the students' lives so that we can better understand their emotional needs, right? Because establishing and building emotional health is critical. When I was that leader back in the corporate world, I gave a lesson and a talk to a development program to other leaders and managers and said basically many of these things. And I had a leader come up to me at a break and very gruffly say, "I'm not into that touchy-feely stuff." And I looked at him and I paused and I said, "That's your job. You need to know what's going on in the lives of those around you, your colleagues, your friends, your employees. You need to understand who's dealing with stresses, who's taking care of sick parents, who's got to take on an extra job, who's going on vacation, who's saving to build a house. These are things that you need to know. That's part. It may not be natural to you, but it's part of your job. So you need to do that. Do that with your friends. Show you care. Faculty, do it with your students. Understand what's going on in their lives. Know what's going to happen. Another thing is this, UCO tennis team. This is a picture taken at the indoor national tournament where we came in second in the nation for indoors. One of these is a student of mine who the week before said, "Hey, Dr. Elliott, will you come watch us play tennis?" So my wife and I, went to the first night, the quarterfinals, and loved it. It was awesome, and we won the quarterfinals. So the next day, my wife said, "Are you going to go tonight?" And I said, "Yes, of course." So we went to the semifinals, and we won the semifinals. And then we couldn't go to the finals because I had class. But go to your kids' sporting events. Go support your students. If they're in musicals, go see that. Sweeney Todd was fabulous. Go support them and do the things that they need to see you there. If they have an exhibit, go see their exhibit. Be a part of their lives academically as well as outside of the classrooms. And finally, this is a picture of my wife and I at the UCO hockey team. So the hockey team this year got second in the nation as well in ACHA, right? But this is a reminder here, faculty, cheer for your students. Students, cheer for your peers and colleagues. Cheer for them inside the classroom, cheer for them outside of the classroom. Lift them up, give them what they need in the moment that they need it, and be there for them, both as an individual, but also just someone who cares. Seek to serve first. Thank you.